Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. Sense restraint, the wise use of sense restraint, is not only part of the monastic practice, but can be also very much a part of lay life. Like all of these practices, both in lay life and monastic life, they are the same, but to varying degrees. Because in order to grow, in order to develop one's mind wholesomely and happily along the path towards our ultimate goal of freedom from suffering, nibbana, from the teachings of the Buddha, one does not have to give up everything in worldly life and become or ordain into monastic life as a monk or a nun. One can also very satisfactorily practice this path as a lay person. And if this wasn't the case, it wouldn't work. The monastics need the support of lay people for their basic requirements of clothing, robes, shelter, of food, shelter, and medicine, just the 4 requisites. And the lay people require the spiritual backing of the monks and nuns, the conveyance of the teachings of the Buddha, and depending in which culture and which country, some aspects of ceremonial practice. And this is a harmonious existence. Lay men, lay women, monks and nuns. And without all 4 supports, like a table, you need 4 legs for it to stay firm, steady, solid, level. And these 4 supports of lay men, lay women, monks and nuns are what offer that grounding, that solidity to the sasana, the religion. And consequently, it has lasted for a long time. So although when I'm looking at sense restraint, this in terms of monastic practice is quite considerably more restrained than in lay life, it is only by degrees, and the more you move towards the higher degrees, the the more restraint you employ, the more restraint you exercise in your own lives as lay people, the closer you bring yourselves towards monastic practice, and the more quickly you will be able to develop your practice of meditation, samadhi, and enjoyment, and contentment, and therefore happiness. And this is what I am going to talk about now. How we exercise restraint of our senses. So our 6 senses are of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking is the 6th and hardest of them all to restrain, to control, to stop. So we do not try to stop thinking. We can stop and we can observe thinking. We do not try to control thinking. It is out of our control, but it can be trained, directed. Parameters can be adjusted, and your thinking will then naturally follow a more wholesome direction. And this is primarily going to be as a result of how we exercise restraint over those other 5 senses of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. What exposure we have to all that we see, what we hear, smell, taste, and what we touch is going to result in either the development of wholesome or unwholesome mind states. So for instance, if we watch all action, blood and gore, sex and violence, horror movies, if there is such a thing, including all of those bad things, then we are subjecting our senses of seeing and hearing to things that will only eventually, they may result initially in some form of temporary distraction or some form of temporary pleasure, but this is only as a result of distraction or relief from what you call or what you think is boredom, or what you call or what you think is pain or unsatisfactoriness. By distracting yourself with something all adventurous in seeing and hearing, you distract yourself from something you don't like. So you're not accepting aversion or disliking for what it truly is. Now this path is, this Buddhist teachings, is to develop mindfulness, sati. And mindfulness is the one of the main objectives towards attaining to enlightenment. And mindfulness of our senses, what we're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, knowing what we're seeing is just that seeing, hearing is just that hearing, and so on, is very, very important to the development of restraint of those senses, as is the restraint of those senses very, very important to the development of mindfulness. So a little bit of a chicken and an egg situation. However, we can find a beginning in that. Back to our movie, of all singing and dancing content to arouse the senses, it will have a detrimental effect on mindfulness. It will have a detrimental effect on mind states, being as it will eventually develop unwholesome mind states. Rather than calmness and serenity, it will awaken in you the emotion of subtly, and you'll think it's within control, being as it's contained within a form of entertainment, but subtly it will awaken the emotions of anxiety and fear, all of which are part of aversion, which is akin to hatred. And the root defilements, the root causes of suffering, are greed, hatred, and delusion. Fueling any of them is moving in the opposite direction towards it's a dog, moving in the opposite direction towards our goal of enlightenment. So we need to try and do the opposite. Of course, if you are monks, don't have entertainment as part of our practice of extra restraint, but if you are a lay person, it's perfectly fine to have entertainment. But of course, you have choice. And this is where you have some element of control as to which comes first, restraint or mindfulness. So if you choose to watch some nice movie that is, I can't think of any examples, but you know yourselves, that isn't all of those things that I mentioned previously, and doesn't have to have a happy ending, but something about real life. People can still die, there can still be suffering, but it must be, I think they have guidances still, don't they, of X-rated, I don't know, the PG, parental guidance, you know, anything more or less along the parental guidance lines, I'm sure is perfectly okay. But if it's sort of triple X rated, or whatever they call it, it's going to be something that will only have an adverse effect on your practice. So the point of developing the ability to restrain our senses is that in turn, bye-bye, Chokdi, the point of being able to develop the ability to restrain our senses is that we can more protect our sila, our moral virtue. In the case of lay people, your 5 precepts of no killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct, lying, or taking of intoxicants, and if you're living in the monastery, 8 precepts, and then monastics or novices 10, and then to 227 of the monks and and 311 of the nuns. But regardless of the number of precepts, you're trying to do no harm and live a moral and virtuous life, practicing meditation and developing wholesome mind states, sila, samadhi, panya, which is the 3 parts of the Noble Eightfold, the 3 categories in the Noble Eightfold Path. And the way we try to, lots of visitors today, thank you. Yes, yes, yes. Come. Oh, is it coffee one? Huh? Onion. Coffee. Yes. Sadhu, sadhu. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Okay. So this is becoming quite a regular thing. Nice delivery of iced coffee. This time it's in a big plastic bag, like this, full of ice. And here we go, senses. My senses are lighting up. I'm thinking, taste and coolness because of the ice. You see how easily we're drawn. As a result of this, I'm heating up a little bit with the excitement, or more perhaps because it's about 40 degrees and I stepped a little bit away from the fan. But we restrain our senses not to suppress or block feelings. I think in some schools of Western psychology, this is somewhat frowned upon, and we should be all open and let it all out. Well, open and letting it all out is okay, but overexposure is not okay. One can become numbed to overstimulation through the nature of what is behind addiction. The more we have or see or do of something that gives us a good feeling, the more we want, as a result of the creation of dopamine, a chemical, a natural bodily hormone that produces pleasure and the desire for more of that pleasure. But each time you require a little bit more. And this has the kind of numbing of, what's the word? Anyway, whatever it is you're doing, it only deteriorates. It doesn't, you need a bit more of it. And the enjoyment wears off. So people end up with all kinds of addictions as a result of this just natural phenomena, but more so as a result of not quite understanding the natural phenomena. Now, if you sort of lay off of something like this that you're doing for a little while, it's never a bad idea, because then when you go back to doing it again, it's more enjoyable and you've kind of reset the levels again. But the tendency often is not to stop for a while and to keep on trying to get the better of this, the better of that, and eventually I'm purposely trying to not to use specific examples, because I think in your own imagination you can really bring up what is most suitable to your own circumstances. And I'm also not wanting to sound, or certainly not wanting to be, judgmental over what is quite ordinary behavior. But what I'm trying to do is highlight how we can understand what is ordinary behavior and make just very slight adjustments to create extraordinary benefits and extraordinary mind states, purely through understanding. So, the whole coffee thing's put me off a little bit, I'm sorry. As monks, in the morning we go on alms round, we go into town, or on any occasion when we go out into town, we have within our Vinaya our huge number of rules, 227 rules. In the 75 Sakya training rules, one of those is we're to walk with our eyes downcast. Now, of course, lay people, I wouldn't expect to be doing this, but we walk around And people are used to monks in Thailand, so this is expected of them, walking around outside. And then also you are, to some extent, forgiven maybe a little bit if you don't notice something coming from that direction or that direction, because it is to be expected of a monk that they're just walking, looking about 1 or 2 meters in front of them, downwardly. But still mindful of all that's going on around them and where they're stepping and being careful. But you know, in a busy environment sometimes, not so much around here, but you might not see something coming from quickly from another direction, like a fast moving car or something. But that car driver would see you as a monk in your robes and know you're a monk and know that you're not looking and stop, as they do here. Not so much in other countries where they're not used to monastic behavior, but they're certainly very considerate of that here. Because what are we doing? We're out of our environment, which is an environment which you could say is, well, it is of seclusion, but it is an environment of suppressing the senses, blocking the stimulation of what you may consider as the real world. Now, the real world is a world of distraction through light, sound, smells, tastes, everything possible heightened to keep up with that race of wanting more, better, tastier, faster, hotter, colder, more expensive, bigger, smaller, heavier, lighter, shinier, all of that wanting more, craving, addictive nature of all things, which ultimately are unsatisfactory anyway. They call that the real world. No, the real world is, without any of that, seeing how our minds behave without that distraction. And firstly, they behave by reacting with aversion, this hatred, this root defilement of not liking, the lack of stimulation that your minds, your bodies have become used to over the time when you've been growing up and living your lives in the world. So, yes, so suppression and blocking. To some extent you can consider that looking and not, like a horse with blinkers, in order that it can concentrate on where it's running, racing or walking, a monk walks around blinkered like this. Similarly with the ears, with hearing, one is careful about what one is listening to. We don't listen to radios and have entertainment. And this is all practical exercises in restraint. I'm fortunate someone gets me premium YouTube so that I can listen to Dharma talks and things on YouTube, which even now on YouTube, if I was to look for adverts, want adverts, if you have YouTube Premium, you cannot have them. I know some adverts have been popping up in my videos and I'm working on sorting that out, but they're always going to be there around somewhere. In life, we have advertisements, and actually people like them. And I used to not, they're beautifully made. Advertisements are there again to stimulate the senses. There's nothing wrong with them. But of course, they're all designed to prey on our nature of greed. Yes, what we think we want. Greed and then hatred. And it is not understanding this that is delusion. So, in this environment of seclusion living within the monastery, we are not blocking, we're not suppressing our senses. Because here I can still see, I can still smell, I can still hear, I can still feel, I can certainly still think. In fact, more so, because my view and my hearing and my smelling and everything is not distracted. It is a little bit at the moment by the nice coffee that arrived, or was. But without any of those, you see how excited I get from such a small thing that perhaps on the outside world is just another coffee. This is, I know I had one in the last video, but it's a once a week kind of thing normally at the very most. Usually otherwise it's just Nescafe and hot water, black Nescafe and hot water, which is fine also, because then again I am looking after my senses of taste. And what I'm getting around to saying in a very roundabout and distracted manner is we are not blocking or suppressing, we are guarding. This is the most important thing to understand about sensory restraint, or how to use sense restraint wisely. There's no good burying your head in the sand and pretending there is no seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching and feeling. So for instance, if you put yourself in a sensory deprivation chamber, one of these kind of boxes where there's no light, no sound, and I don't know, it's maybe filled with water so you float about a bit, there's no real feeling. This is not going to help you develop wholesome mind states. This is annihilation. This is running away. If you put yourselves in the forest, in the jungle, you are exposing yourself to nature. There's more for me to see here, more for me to hear, taste and smell, taste and touch, perhaps than if I went into the city. But everything I see in the city is artificially created. It's stimulating my mind and through the five senses with distraction, trying to induce our desires, trying to pull us into our natural state of greed and buy things and do things. And this is the commercial world. So we guard our senses. And this is where Sila comes into it. And we can use it as our best guards of our senses. If you remember from when I talked previously about Hiri and Ottappa, Hiri is the fear of breaking our precepts, wise fear. And Ottappa is the fear of the consequences of breaking our precepts, wise fear. I say wise fear because it's just a sensible understanding that we will only feel bad. Well, we won't feel good if we break our precepts. If we kill, if we steal, commit sexual misconduct, if we lie even a little bit, or we take intoxicants, then it will affect our minds detrimentally. It will only create unwholesome mind states. Whereas if we are very strict and keep those precepts, we can only develop wholesome mind states. And the wise fear of the consequences of breaking those precepts is the understanding of karma, which is actions, that all actions of body, speech and mind have results. Now we can say results in this coming moments, years, or even lifetimes. It doesn't matter. If we kill, then there will be consequences. Stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, or even taking intoxicants. There are always consequences, which are never good. You may rob a bank and get away with the money, but you're going to forever be worried about being caught, for example. So these can be our guards to what we allow in through the doors of our senses. So if you think of Hiri and Ottappa as bodyguards outside of a nightclub, in fact many temples outside of Buddhist temples have Hiri and Ottappa, which are not really people or personalities or anything like that. They're just they've made these mythological kind of angels, if you like, protectors. Just really for us to have something to visualize in terms of this very powerful way of protecting sila, this understanding of the fear of breaking the sila and the fear of the consequences. So sometimes outside of temple doors, they have one on each side of the door, hiri and otapa, like bodyguard, not bodyguards, what are those things, bouncers outside of nightclubs to stop people coming in. And we keep them in our minds when we're out and about and looking here and looking there. And if you're a monk, you just don't look anywhere. It's easy, yes? But that isn't blocking and suppressing doing that. It's knowing that we've 100% committed to this path. So there is no need for us to be looking elsewhere. But you're always making choices in lay life, and you need to be looking here and there, everywhere, in order to make informed choices, very moral or immoral. It's up to you. But they are based on sila. So when you're looking in one direction and you see, let's say, advertisements of a wholesome nature, and I'm going to let you use your imaginations again rather than me giving you examples which are only going to be crude and unnecessary. I'm sure you can think of something unwholesome to look at, maybe not in a overly moralistic way, unwholesome just to be looking. You can say, well, I'm only looking, not touching, but it's going to stimulate the mind in an unwholesome manner. And it's going to raise desire, raise greed, if you like. Because desire is the root. Desire sums up greed and hatred, aversion and wanting, because it's just the positive and negative forms of desire. And you're stirring this up, this desire, to go and get that thing, or have more of that thing, or act upon that thing, in order to distract yourself from really what doesn't need to be distracted from, which is just the normal, the ordinary status quo, if you like, of no stimulation, just contentment. If you're not content, then you'll be looking in this direction, in that direction. Or there can be something wholesome. You may see that there's something over there that would be a very good. Let's take, for example, there's a Buddhist temple. You can go and sit in there and meditate quietly for half an hour, or a church, or any kind of nice park, something like that. You can go and sit down and just be peaceful for a moment or two. So you guard these senses, all of them, and allow in what is good for you. And you reject what is bad for you. Hiri and Otapa, the bouncers. No, you cannot come in. Yes, please, come in. Join the party. It's like that, just that. So, with these guards in place, what we are doing is we're exercising sense restraint to protect sila. We're not exercising sense restraint to block natural human emotions or suppress natural human emotions. We're just not stirring up natural human emotions by adding fuel to the fire. If anything, we are cooling the fire, or just letting it be to naturally go out of its own accord. So that is sense restraint. Trying to think if there's anything important I should add to that. And at the same time, I'm listening to the birds and listening to the sea. And there is a lot. There are a lot of sounds, and a lot of things to see here. And in nature, you are by far from blinkered like the horse. You're far from So yes, when we're in town where there's going to be inappropriate things for the monk or for monastics to be exposed to, we are blinkered. But in this environment, we have to be very aware of all that's going on around us. But we're also very aware that all that's going around us within the confines of the monastic grounds is of a wholesome, natural nature existence, and shouldn't have any detrimental effect on the development of wholesome mind states. Yes. So in your reflections of an evening, which are very important, like I've spoken about before you meditate, which you should really be trying to do before sleeping every day, every night for at least 20 minutes, you can say, have I exercised sense restraint today? When I walked past such and such an event, did I just walk on by without looking at it more closely because there was no need to look at it more closely? Or did I turn and really look into it more closely because I was getting some kind of sensory gratification for really having a good old nose, a good look, peer at something that maybe was only going to stimulate more desires that can ultimately never be satisfied, are insatiable, because all desires are ultimately, all unwholesome desires are resulting from greed and are insatiable, unsatisfactory. And this kind of suffering is what we're trying to move away from, greed. And if you expose yourself to all of this stimulation consistently, you will be wanting these things. If you don't, then what happens, and this is what that's what I was trying to remember what to say, the next bit of this, the important part of this, as a result of, let's say, not being in an environment of sensory deprivation, that is as bad as being in an overly exposed environment. Because how would you deal with the overly exposed environment if you were to go from one from the other? Or how from the overexposed environment would you deal with sensory deprivation? That's like having an opulent, wonderful, luxurious life, or an overly ascetic, very austere life. The Buddha had both and found neither worked. There's the middle path. And it's the same with sense restraint. You don't block out your senses, you guard and you make appropriate what it is you're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. For monks, we take out all forms of entertainment, and I've got rid of advertising off this so I can listen to Dharma talks without any of that distraction, and I don't watch any other things on there really. And we don't listen to music because it all comes under entertainment for this reason, that we're not overstimulating these things. But then we are able to develop through meditation and samadhi a far greater form of happiness and joy that I was describing in the last couple of videos about meditation, that does lead towards contentment, does lead towards satisfaction. And by this development of our minds, our purification of our minds, and the development of wholesome mind states, when we do go into the city or town, for instance, like tomorrow I have to go somewhere, we're not like that person coming from a state of sensory deprivation into the middle of the city all of a sudden. We know there's all this other stuff going on, but we see it mindfully. We have developed mindfulness. So we see all of the flashing lights, the sounds, the music, the restaurants, the movie show places, the pretty ladies, all of the things going on, but as just that, as just seeing. We see seeing as seeing, hearing as hearing, smelling as smelling, tasting as tasting, and touching as touching. It's just that. We don't see it as stimulation to wanting. It doesn't have a result in making us crave what it is we see, to have, to bring it in. We are already content within. So our guards keep it away. And this is the difference. This is why it is not blocking, this is not suppressing. It is understanding. So it is turning delusion into wisdom. And it is turning hatred or aversion into neutrality, and greed and wanting and liking into neutrality. So it is neutralizing desire. In other words, it's cooling desire. It's not adding fuel to the fire. So this kind of brings in the recent talks on that very subject of desire and fire and meditation. And this can be seen in our environment that surrounds us. So how do we do that in lay life? Well, we just set our homes up accordingly. We all have somewhere to go at night, however small, or even if it's only temporary. Have something, a point of focus, a place in your home that is your point of refuge. And this is the point of setting up a little shrine sometimes. Even here in this kuti, we have a huge temple at the top of the mountain and a sala in there with a beautiful Buddha Rupa. But this is essentially a wooden hut. It's quite it's a bit luxurious for a wooden hut, but it's not really, it's kind of got holes in it and things, and not, anyway. I have, wherever I am, I just have a little Buddha Rupa, my mala. We don't wear malas as monks, but I have one, which I've had for a long time. Just those two items, which I place somewhere with a candle and some incense, and that is my little Buddha shrine, my Buddhist shrine. So in that shrine you have seeing and smelling with senses, and obviously you have the surrounding sounds and all that's going on. But that's my focus point, even if I go from here and go and stay in a busy city. That's what I would take into the little room where I may be staying in a different monastery or something like that. Or if I'm staying on a rock on a beach somewhere out in the open, I still have this little point of reference. If you don't have that, you can have this point of reference within in your mind, in your imagination. There's nothing wrong with that. Rather than your point of reference be the go-to smartphone or device where you're watching entertainment, you can still do these things, but have a reference to come back to. So when the adverts come on in your movie, then you can look at your Buddha Rupa, Buddhist Buddha shrine, and say Yetipiso Bhagavadaham Samma Sambuddho, something like this. Just something, take yourself away from it for a moment until the adverts are finished, and then go back. But the best point of reference, of course, always is the breath, which is always with you. So next time something comes up that you feel you should guard your senses against, you don't go, oh, no, 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 no. You just maybe just glance away, yes. Or if you're not able to do so, just pay little attention to it. See it as seeing, seeing as seeing, hearing as hearing. But inhale, full breath through your nose. Be aware, bringing your attention, your awareness back to the breath, like in meditation. That is your point of reference of non-distraction, where there is no greed, hatred, no delusion. It's understandable, it's clear, it's neutral. And then you are really fighting at the very roots and basis of this thing that people call boredom. Because boredom is just a form of aversion, part of hatred, of not having the things you think you need or want, cravings, not being able to satisfy cravings, wanting to be elsewhere. Whereas you could be elsewhere with all of those things and really, really desperately craving and wanting not to have all those things going on and just to be back, bored again. But we know from our own experiences that when you get there, it's still the same. Why? Because it's you. You are there. And all of this is in your mind. And what's going on is in your mind is as a result of the causes and conditions from external sensory stimulation. All you're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching is causing you to think about all of this stuff. So we guard what we're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching with our best friends and bodyguards, our best friends and club bouncers, Hiri and Otapa, who remind us that if we break our precepts, it's not good. We just feel bad about that. And also if we break our precept, there are always adverse consequences. And that means we try to keep our precepts as best we can. And then when we do that, and we keep our precepts as best we can, we feel more drawn to what is wholesome. And automatically and naturally, our senses will direct towards the more beautiful, rather than the unbeautiful. I don't mean the beautiful in terms of aesthetically appealing, but natural, in terms of nature, trees, landscapes. Not to be intoxicated by such things and not to become reliant on such things, because again, it is still sensory stimulation. But to understand that as wholesome sensory stimulation as opposed to the counter sensory stimulation of maybe some other things you can think of and imagine in other environments. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. And I have to go on a little trip tomorrow. I'll maybe, actually, I think by the time you see this video, I would have been there and done that. So I shall tell you about that in the next video when I get around to making that. So I hope some of that is useful, and if it is, then please use it. If not, then don't.